So in recent years, there's been a surge in publications of the texts of magic roll spells and of theoretical discussion of the practice. However, the scribes' conceptualization of the demons that they sought to influence and the techniques that they employed to do so remain contentious issues in the field of Jewish magic. Today, I'd like to introduce you to a debate about the application of performative speech act theory to Jewish magic texts. I will argue that in the case of the magic rolls, application of speech act theory produces an understanding of how the magic works, grounded in the legal professional context of its producers. I'm then going to present some findings on the extent to which the magic rolls bear the features of this kind of legal magic and what those features might reveal about how the scribes understood demons and human-demon interactions. So let's talk a little bit about speech act theory. In How to Do Things with Words, Austin sets out a theory of performative speech acts, at the centre of which is the understanding that some utterances, rather than merely describing or reporting action, constitute the actual performance of an action by their very utterance. In making such statements, the speaker does something beyond the act of speaking the words themselves that changes the state of affairs in the world. He gives several examples to illustrate performative speech acts. I bet you it will rain tomorrow. I name this ship the Queen Elizabeth. I give and bequeath my watch to my brother. And the classic example, I do, as uttered in the course of a wedding ceremony. As we can see in all these examples, the context of a speech act matters, and Austin sets out the conditions for their performance that he calls the doctrine of infelicities. He says, A1, there must exist an accepted conventional procedure having a certain conventional effect, that procedure to include the uttering of certain words by certain persons in certain circumstances. And further, A2, the particular persons and circumstances in a given case must be appropriate for the invocation of the particular procedure invoked. And B1, the procedure must be executed by all participants both correctly, and B2, completely. Starr's development of Austin's work articulates how the constitutive rules of social institutions go beyond regulating the behaviour of the actors within them to actually make new forms of behaviour possible. Together, a system of rules of varying centrality constitute a social institution and create the possibility of a range of actions that can take place within it. So we see that speech acts do seem to share a lot with some magical practices. The general approach in applying Austin's work to the field of Jewish magic is concerned with the requirement of a precise uttering of a magical formula, ritual circumstances of its utterance appropriate to its performance, a personal situation that authorises the practitioner to perform the action. Oh, sorry, that's it. Rebecca Lessons, for example, produces a really rich analysis of the adoration of the Prince of the Presence along these lines. The application of speech act theory to Jewish magic is controversial, though, and the idea that magic works because of words of power remains the dominant view. Yuval Harari has challenged its validity directly, citing Jewish scribes' occupation of an entirely different worldview from the world of performative speech acts. And it's this claim that I really would like to challenge with this paper. In 2018, he argued that the power of the magic incantation is not derived from the consensual character of language, but from its wholly divine character. He claims that the efficacious force of Jewish magic texts comes from the holy standing of language in general and of the divine names that embody its omnipotent potential. He sees magic working in objective terms of cause and effect, where if the instructions are followed properly, the magic will work. Harari argues that the worldview in which ancient Jewish magic has its roots is conceptually far removed from the one underlying Austin's theory. Speech act theory deals with consensual language and the exposure of hidden social agreements that underpin it, and so should only be understood in social terms, where performative statements are able to change only the social state of affairs. In contrast, according to Harari, Jewish magic seeks to introduce limitless change. Issues common in Jewish magic literature have no bearing on the social consensus that underlies the possibility of speech acts. Rather, the intended consequences of Jewish magic transcend the realms of human society and its valid social agreements to actually affect the world. So, Jewish Aramaic magic rolls are really interesting evidence in the context of this debate. There are several thousand known to exist, and they were being used over several centuries in late antique Mesopotamia. They're ceramic bowls inscribed with spells, and they come in a few different dialects, but the majority are Jewish Babylonian Aramaic, which is the same kind as the Babylonian Talmud. They're written individually for the benefit of named clients, usually, and they aim to protect them from demons and the troubles that they cause, often invoking God, his angels, and passages of the Hebrew Bible. Now, we've seen that certain magical practices might have a lot in common with speech acts, but we can also see that legal contexts and speech acts go hand in hand. Legal frameworks are an obvious example of the social institutions that set out rules governing the range of actions that can take place within them. Austin introduces the term exercitives as a class of illocutionary force that a speech act may possess. Exercitives are speech acts that exercise powers or rights, and their consequences may be that others are compelled, allowed, or not allowed to do certain acts. This kind of speech act is particularly relevant then in the context of legal rights and obligations. Importantly, exploration of the magic bowl's association with Jewish legal traditions is emerging that situates the scribes within a legal professional context. There isn't time to go into much detail here, but the work of Sian Biro and later Abigail Mannequin-Bamberger has been important. Between them, they've highlighted evidence that demonstrates many bowl scribes' familiarity with wider Jewish scribal culture and the bodies of knowledge associated with it. Most recently, Mannequin-Bamberger has suggested there may be as many as 20 distinct Jewish legal formulations now known to be represented in the texts of bowl spells. Their work establishes that bowl producers were very likely to have been professional Jewish scribes who also produced various legal and religious texts. As Biro has noted, many bowl spells appropriate legal methods for managing social relationships between humans to beings in the supernatural realm. In their case, we have a magical practice that seems to explicitly rely on speech acts in a written form to achieve its aims. How then might reference to the legal and religious professional context of the scribes allow for Harari's critiques to be addressed? It's correct that speech acts are inherently social actions and that the intended consequences of Jewish magic do transcend the realms of human society. However, he doesn't give an argument against the view taken by scholars like Lessers, who actually put this out well before the publication of his objections, that simply extends what is understood to comprise Jewish society beyond its human dimension into the supernatural realm. The way that this cosmology shapes the practitioner's own understanding of the social networks they exist in relation to means that his objection that Jewish magic seeks to effect change beyond the social might be overcome where it's primarily an effect on the social state of affairs among supernatural beings that is sought. The social institutions relevant to the lives of the Jewish scribes, those that provide the rules determining their professional actions, are the various Jewish legal systems operating at all levels of the created order. This diagram represents these legal systems, the areas of the created order that they pertain to, and their relation to the authoritative power they derive from. The bottom right section, down here, is the immediate setting of the human scribes who are performing their bureaucratic function described by Swartz, where they act as intercessors for individuals before judges and other formidable persons. The scribe's professional role is to navigate the system on behalf of their clients, allowing them to take exercitive actions like divorce or transference of ownership that satisfy the conventions for their proper performance, including the creation of accompanying documents, just as some of Austin's examples of speech acts do. In this way, these particular scribes, contrary to Harari's assessment, are very much at home in the conceptual world of Austin's speech acts. The specialist knowledge they possess, however, goes beyond the limits of the human authority of the courts. As represented in this diagram, the institutions of Jewish law in the human sphere are drawn from and are ultimately dependent on the divine law and authority of God. Understanding how the cosmological worldview of the scribes includes the constitutive rules of divine law originating from the authority of God, guaranteed by the consistency of God's nature, and pervading all levels of the created social order makes the appropriation of their techniques for managing human social interactions for use across the supernatural realm a natural extension of their practice. Understanding this resolves Harari's concern that the consensual character of performative language lacks the objective power necessary to achieve magical aims. In the case of exercitive actions, their ability to achieve results does not depend only on the consensual character of language, but also on the weight of authority behind the rules that make them possible, and ultimately on that authority's power to enforce those rules in real terms. The fact that in the worldview of the Jewish scribes, the authority behind the rules within which their magic operates is God, grants their exercitive actions the necessary omnipotent potential. If at least some magic bowls can be understood as attempting to take exercitive legal action against beings in the supernatural realm, these bowls are documents that both are the performance of the action itself, aimed at changing the social state of affairs that exists between human clients and those beings, and the satisfaction of the conventional procedures required for divine authority to enforce that change if necessary. Research questions in my current project ask to what extent the bowl spells more widely belong to this type of Jewish legal magic. Again, there isn't time to say much about the methodology of this project, but it involves using digital humanities techniques to support analysis of the features of 255 of the most recently published bowl spells. During this research, 7 features associated with this operational mechanism were identified and incorporated into the data ontology. The 1,902 segments that the spells were broken down into were then assigned types according to any of these Jewish legal magic features that they display. The findings already reveal that the cumulative presence of these features in the dataset is highly significant. Their use reveals a dynamic picture of social interactions between humans, demons, and various other supernatural beings in the scribe's conceptualization of the practice. First, we find 659 segments containing verbs indicating exercitive legal actions themselves. Examples include I adjure you, I beswear you, or I put you under oath. I write to you, I release you, I divorce you, I dismiss you. Others declare people or spaces to be sealed, demons to be bound, curses to be overturned, or authorities to be petitioned. These primary actions are the ones that have exercitive force. They are the exercising of the scribe's right to place supernatural beings under obligation, and they exert influence on the behavior of those beings that compels them to respond to the next feature, which are secondary imperative verbs. For example, we have I adjure you and beswear you that you may move and be removed and be displaced and go away and depart and be abolished and be annulled. These are really interesting. I wish I had more time to tell you about them. But there are 272 segments containing one or more of these kinds of imperatives directed at either the authorities or the malevolent entities. Next, we find ways that the texts self-identify as legal documents. So these include segments that identify the text as documents, deeds, letters, writs, etc., and mark them as the same types of documents produced in the scribe's terrestrial professional role. Many bowls, for example, seek to banish demons using a get or a Jewish divorce document, or make explicit reference to court settings. Some also show features of conforming to the procedures associated with legal documents. Some include the phrase, the seal of the deed of divorce, followed by a reference to the divine name, where the phrase itself isn't a sentence. Instead, it's physically marking the space for the signatures or seals that would be needed at the end of a contract. The name of God is used in the place where a human witness might sign or place their seal. Indeed, references to seals and signet rings occur frequently in the bowls. Similarly, 4 texts end with the instruction, Gabriel, Michael, Raphael sign on this legal document, clearly enlisting the angels as signatories to the spell. Another formula contains the phrase, come and bear witness concerning this curse that he returned, calling on various supernatural powers to be witnesses to the action. As I've already mentioned, many formulaic phrases used in the bowls are known to be appropriated from Jewish legal documents, and one example would be the phrase, according to the law of Moses and Israel, or according to the law of the daughters of Israel. In total, 291 segments that identify themselves as or emulate the features of Jewish legal documents were identified. Often introduced with the phrase in the name of, the next features are references to authorities understood by the scribes to establish, uphold, and enforce the rules in the supernatural realm. These segments often refer to God, his angels, powerful or holy human figures. We've heard a lot about Solomon already. He's big in the bowls, or even demonic rulers. By prefacing these actions taken in this way, the segments emphasize the authorities that back them and encourage the demons as the subject of those actions to understand the text as binding and act accordingly. These authorities are also the judicial powers that the scribes hope will deem their exercise of actions valid and who will use their own power to enforce them if necessary. These references, therefore, also serve to address the judicial authorities, drawing the attention of those beings to the actions being taken in a way that corresponds with the petitioning of a human court. 906 segments appeal to one or more of these authority figures. Use of precedents, often introduced by the phrase just as, can be understood to function in a similar way to the use of precedent in a modern legal argument. They serve to establish the action taken or outcome sought as having a basis in tradition, and to establish obligation on the part of the authorities to act in a way that is consistent with that tradition. In the text of the Magic Bowl survey for this study, 506 segments were identified falling into two broad categories. First, there are precedents that refer to the previous success of the techniques employed, either by reference to established rules or the traditional methods of famous human exorcists. Then there are precedents that refer to God's merciful nature and role as protector of his people, or that refer to God's ability and willingness to act with mighty force against transgressors of his law, or to dispatch other beings to do so on his behalf. My study identified 105 examples of my sixth feature of Jewish legal magic. These conditional threats are usually framed as the consequences that will apply if a demon refuses to accept the exercise of action performed by the scribe and its accompanying imperatives. They're often indicated by the phrase, if you, followed by an account of the being's objectionable activities and a threat of violent punishment, sometimes from the scribe himself, but more often from the authorities. Examples include, if you do not accept these oaths, may the curses that are written in the Torah and in Deuteronomy come upon you. If you go and persecute the body of personal name, they will ban you, break you, excommunicate you. If you do not go out from personal name, I shall take some of your hair for binding you and some of your fat for sealing you, and I shall throw you to the depths of the netherworld. This feature of magic bowls fundamentally undermines Harari's theory that all Jewish magic was thought to work in straightforward terms of cause and effect, where if the instructions are properly followed, the magic will work. These conditional threats demonstrate that the spells are dependent on social recognition. They attest to the scribe's belief that their initial exercitive actions may not work by themselves. They need to be accepted by the demons who are capable of ignoring them. Of all the features identified, these most explicitly reflect the scribe's conceptualization of demons as social actors with agency of their own, who need to be convinced to take the spell seriously or be forced out in other ways. The final example here even seems to acknowledge a distinction between the scribal attempt in the first instance to effect the change in social terms and other magical means that they will resort to if necessary, in this case, some kind of sympathetic magic that was probably understood to work in the way that Harari suggests. The scribes are apparently offering the demons a choice. Leave the easy way of your own volition, or face the consequences of doing it the hard way. The characteristic of Jewish legal magic is its rigor and precision. This feature is ubiquitous in the text of the bowls, and many subtypes have emerged in the analysis. 1,434 instances of these subtypes are identified in the dataset, many segments incorporating several of these subtypes at once. These features reflect a concern for avoiding complications in the validity of the actions performed by the scribe. Many of these include phrases identified by Manneken Bamberger as originating in rabbinic literature, such as the phrases, and every name that they have, and from this day and forever. In other cases, the names or relatives by which clients, and especially demons or groups of demons, might be known are listed. The same strategy is applied to listing body parts or physical spaces or activities now barred to the demon's address. This characteristic rigor attests to the scribe's understanding that the demons had enough knowledge of the rules to know when a spell is or isn't valid, and were capable of using that knowledge to their advantage. It may be that the rigor, precision, and often redundancy with which the scribes composed their legal magic reflects their sense of being in competition with demons, pitching their own knowledge and skill against the deviousness and determination of their opponents. The extent to which the bowl spells incorporate these features demonstrates the scribe's concern to close off any possible loopholes and eliminate any vagueness that the demons might find to get around the constraints on their behavior that the spells seek to establish. So, to wrap things up, the expanded social sphere, the legal professional context of the bowl scribes, the hierarchical institutions of Jewish law within this worldview, and the role of exercitive speech acts in particular in this context, all point to Harari being mistaken in his assertion that all producers of Jewish magic texts inhabited a worldview far removed from the world of Austen speech acts. In fact, in the case of the magic bowls, there is strong evidence to suggest that they belong to the type of Jewish legal magic that operates in terms of exercitive action taken by scribes on behalf of their clients against demonic members of society. The cumulative presence of features associated with this mechanism in the bowl spells supports the conclusion that this was one way the texts were thought to function by the scribes themselves. Analysis of the occurrence of these features produces a dynamic picture of human-demon interactions involving other beings in the supernatural realm in various roles and grounded in the established rules of Jewish legal, religious, and magical traditions. While there is much more work to be done in the analysis of these features, I hope that I've given you a flavour of what this project is about. I welcome any comments or questions you may have, and I thank you very much for having me.